Hey guys, today I'll show you a sci-fi horror TV series named Stranger Things Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in Hawkins, a quiet American town in the 1980s. The tightly shut doors of the Energy Research Lab are forced open, and a researcher bursts out in a panic. The lights in the corridor behind him flicker as if something is coming. Just as the researcher enters the elevator, he hears a strange noise and looks up to see a monster on top of the elevator, which swallows him whole, including his smelly part. The scene then shifts to a place where 4 children, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will, are playing a tabletop game in a basement. Mike is enthusiastically role-playing, while Dustin and Lucas call for Will to cast a fireball or a defense spell. Unfortunately, the dice roll off the table and into a corner. Mike's mother comes in and urges them to go home, so the children hurriedly end the game without seeing the result. On their way home, Dustin and Will race each other on their bikes, with Will pedaling furiously and quickly leaving Dustin behind. In an attempt to take a shortcut, Will enters the restricted area of the research lab and encounters a monster blocking his path. Terrified, Will crashes into the nearby forest, and he quickly runs back home. No one is home, and the phone goes unanswered. As the monster approaches the door, the lock opens automatically. In desperation, Will hides in a warehouse, grabs a shotgun, loads it, and aims it at the entrance. The monster, however, does not appear. Instead, the light bulbs in the warehouse grow brighter, and then both he and the monster vanish into thin air. The next morning, Will's mother, Joyce, finds his bed empty and suspects he spent the night at Mike's house. When she calls, she learns that Will did come home the night before. Realizing her son may be missing, she rushes to the police station to report it. Historically, the biggest cases in this small town have been lost cats and dogs, so Sheriff Hopper initially believes Will is skipping school or visiting his father. After all, Will's parents are divorced and living separately. However, Joyce insists, so Hopper reluctantly begins an investigation. Will's friends, the 3 children from the basement, go to school together and are surprised that Will is absent. They wonder why he didn't come, and if the school bully would have had a tougher time had Will been there. The teacher fails to contact Will's parents, and after school, the children receive a demonstration of a newly purchased powerful walkie-talkie set that can transmit signals very far. As the children get excited about it, Sheriff Hopper arrives to speak with them. The 3 children firmly state that Will was heading home from a dense forest and even provide specific locations. They then volunteer to help with the search. Seeing their enthusiasm, Hopper orders them all to return home and forbids them from conducting any private investigations. Continuing with the search, the officers are led to a dense forest where they only find Will's Tesla bicycle, a treasure that one would push home even if injured. The fact that Will left it in the forest suggests he encountered trouble he couldn't handle. Hopper returns the bike to Joyce and suspects that her son might have come back home. He and his men carefully inspect the area, finding the family dog barking towards the warehouse in the backyard. Assuming the dog is hungry, Joyce quickly takes it away. Hopper enters the warehouse with suspicion, but there's no one inside. However, he hears faint breathing in a corner, but finds nothing upon closer inspection. Convinced that something happened to Will, he quickly gathers volunteers and organizes a search party. Meanwhile, at the Energy Lab, a group of people in suits shake hands with an elderly man, Dr. Brenner, the head of the lab. They enter the quarantine zone, don full protective gear, and arrive at the elevator where the researcher was killed the night before. The corridor lights are still flickering, and the air is filled with murky impurities. The walls show burn marks and are covered with thick, writhing, flesh-like substances. In the innermost room, a larger mass of flesh occupies what was once a concrete wall. It appears to be a living organism, slowly breathing and emitting low growls like a giant beast. However, Dr. Brenner doesn't seem to care. Instead, he asks his subordinates about the whereabouts of a young girl. The camera cuts to a scene of a barefoot girl with a shaved head, wearing a hospital gown. She is the one Dr. Brenner is looking for. The girl stands in front of a burger joint and sneaks into the kitchen when the owner is not looking. She grabs some fries from the table and shoves them into her mouth, clearly starving. The owner sees the girl's ragged clothes and assumes she has run away from an abusive home. He temporarily takes her in, providing food and shelter, and tries to find an opportunity to ask about her identity. The girl initially ignores the owner until he tempts her with food and notices a tattoo on her wrist with the number 11. She finally admits that her name is 11, but doesn't reveal anything about her parents. The owner has no choice but to call the social welfare office. At that moment, an old electric fan in the front hall creaks as it oscillates back and forth. The noise is more irritating than the sound of construction. However, under the girl's gaze, the fan suddenly stops. She continues eating nonchalantly. That night, the search party enters the forest to look for people. During the search, Hopper tells a teacher that he has a daughter who is also interested in studying the universe. The teacher gets excited and suggests including her in his class. Hopper explains that his daughter lives with her mother in the city, implying that the teacher doesn't need to worry about her. However, someone later tells the teacher that Hopper's daughter died a few years ago. Perhaps this is why he's so invested in the missing person case. While the adults are busy, the three kids aren't idling either. Mike contacts Lucas and Dustin using a walkie-talkie, deciding to search for people in the forest. As Mike leaves his house, he sees a boy peering through his sister's window. The boy is her boyfriend, Steve, and since Mike doesn't get along with his sister, he rides away without looking back. Meanwhile, the burger joint has closed for the night. The owner prepares a strawberry ice cream for 11. Her mind works differently from others, and at this moment, she learns how to smile. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. The owner goes to check, telling 11 to stay in the kitchen. When he opens the door, he finds a woman claiming to be from the social welfare office. He warmly invites her in, only to be shot in the head the next moment. It turns out she was sent by the laboratory. Dr. Brenner, eager to capture 11, had been monitoring the town's communication signals. Seeing the situation go south, 11 quickly escapes through the back door, but two armed men block her exit. By the time Dr. Brenner arrives, the men have been taken down, and 11 is nowhere to be found. Dark clouds gather outside with thunder rumbling, signaling an imminent storm. At home, Joyce receives a phone call. She hears intermittent sobbing and a beast's low growl on the line. Although the other party doesn't speak, she's convinced it's her younger son, Will. Unfortunately, she doesn't get to inquire about his condition before a sudden surge of electricity burns and destroys the plastic device. Older brother Jonathan tries to call back, but to no avail. At the same time, the three kids also arrive at the dense forest. They call out for Will through the rain, but receive no response for a long time. Dustin suggests they all turn back, fearing that if they continue searching, they might end up in danger like Will. The other two think Dustin has become timid, and Mike tells him to shut up. It's not that they're annoyed with Dustin, but they hear something coming towards them from deep within the forest. Feeling frightened, the three of them turn around and shine their flashlights in the direction of the noise. They see 11, soaked to the bone, having escaped from the burger joint. Mike then takes 11 back home and settles her in the basement where they usually play games. 11 is still highly alert and doesn't speak, no matter what the three kids ask her. Mike kindly offers her some clean clothes to change into, but 11 starts to lift her skirt in front of them. Startled, the boys quickly turn around. Mike guides her to the bathroom and is about to close the door when 11 suddenly stops him. She doesn't want to be locked in a small space. Mike kindly leaves the door ajar for her. He then discusses the situation with his friends, who think 11 has escaped from a mental hospital and want to return her as soon as possible. But Mike points out the bad weather outside. He suggests keeping her at home for the night and letting the adults handle the situation in the morning. Later, Mike sets up a makeshift bed for her using his sleeping bag. Gradually, 11 lets her guard down. When Mike asks her name, she shows him her tattooed arm and points to herself. Before leaving, 11 even learns to say goodnight like Mike. The next day, Mike prepares extra waffles and puts them in a bag to give to 11. He wolfs down his breakfast, his sister Nancy calling him disgusting. In return, Mike asks her how her anatomy lesson went the night before, hinting at her secret rendezvous with her boyfriend. Nancy is left speechless. Mike then goes to the basement to see 11 and suggests that she go outside and pretend to be lost so his parents can help. That way, someone from social services would come to their door. 11 refuses without hesitation, making a gun gesture with her hand to indicate that someone is after her. Worried about a possible killer, Mike skips school to stay home with 11 and shares stories of his past achievements. 11 is fascinated by everything and, upon seeing a group photo, points to the missing Will. Mike eagerly asks her if she has seen him somewhere before, but just then his mother returns from shopping, and he has to hide 11 in his bedroom closet. He promises to come back soon, and despite feeling nervous, 11 crawls inside. The small space reminds her of when Dr. Brenner used to confine her as punishment when she made mistakes. When Mike comes back after dealing with his mother, he finds 11 curled up in the closet, crying helplessly. On the other side of town, Sheriff Hopper arrives early in the morning at Joyce's house. He informs her that the search party worked all night but found nothing. However, he is not there to deliver bad news, but to discuss the phone call she received the night before. Hopper believes it was a prank since Will's disappearance has made the news, and some people enjoy causing others pain for fun. Joyce insists that she couldn't have mistaken her son's voice and asks Hopper if he could ever mistake his daughter's. She pleads for understanding. Sheriff Hopper empathizes with Joyce and decides not to give up on the search. He plans to visit Joyce's ex-husband for information. Joyce's older son, Jonathan, offers to confront their father himself, but Hopper refuses his request, urging him to stay home and support their emotionally unstable mother. However, Jonathan doesn't listen and leaves town to visit his father in the city after Hopper departs. He plays rock music in the car, which reminds him of how he and Will used to escape reality by listening to tapes when their parents were constantly arguing about their divorce. Upon reaching the city, Jonathan quickly locates his father's home, but finds no trace of Will. His deadbeat dad shows little concern for Will and claims he already told the police that Will hadn't come to see him, suggesting the boy might be lost somewhere. He even criticizes Joyce, causing a heated argument between father and son, who part on bad terms. Meanwhile, Joyce continues her frenzied efforts to find her son. Believing her son will call again, she buys a new phone at the supermarket. With no savings and a tight budget, she asks her boss for 2 weeks' advance on her salary. Her boss agrees, because she has worked here for 10 years. Once home, she installs the new phone and anxiously waits by it, fearing she might miss a call. At this time, the search party is still outside looking for Will. Sheriff Hopper receives a report that the owner of the burger joint has taken his own life. The string of disappearances and suicides in this remote town prompts his colleagues to joke about whether Hopper feels like he's back in the big city as a police officer. Hopper remains somber, as the cases he handled back then involved strangers, while now the victims are friends. He speaks to a regular customer of the burger joint who says the owner had plans to go fishing the following week and had no known enemies, only some conflicts with ex-girlfriends. The customer insists that such a life-loving person couldn't have ended his own life. The last time the customer saw the owner was during lunch the previous day when a child was also present. It's 11, who had just escaped from her captors. However, Hopper assumes it was Will and shows the customer a photo to confirm, but the customer can't provide a clear answer as they didn't pay much attention to the child's appearance. Not wanting to give up on this lead, Hopper takes the search party to the area around the burger joint that night. They find clothing fragments near a sewer entrance and follow the sewer tunnel, only to discover that the drainage pipe leads to the mysterious energy lab. On the other side of town, after school, Lucas and Dustin go to Mike's house. Upon entering, they discover that 11 hasn't left yet and has even moved to the master bedroom. The two friends accuse her of not following the plan, especially an emotional Lucas. Mike quickly explains that the girl knows their friend Will, who went missing in the forest, and she appeared in the same forest, claiming that bad people are chasing her. They believe it's not a coincidence, and the people chasing her might be the same ones who took Will. Lucas thinks Mike isn't thinking straight and insists on telling the adults about 11, but as soon as he opens the bedroom door, it slams shut on its own. They turn to see 11's nose bleeding, realizing she has supernatural powers. The two kids are instantly intimidated and stay at Mike's house for dinner. When 11 comes downstairs, she curiously touches and looks at everything. To avoid getting caught by their parents, the three kids cause some chaos, spilling milk and knocking on the table, making for an awkward scene. 11 takes the opportunity to hide in the basement. When Mike brings her dinner, Lucas apologizes, explaining that he just wants to find his friend. This confuses 11, who innocently asks what a friend is. Mike replies that a friend is someone you'd do anything for, and who keeps promises and tells the truth. 11 wants to be their friend, so she flips over a board game to reveal a piece representing Will and places the Demogorgon in front of him, indicating that he's hiding from it. The three kids are puzzled, but later in the story it's revealed that the flipped board represents the upside-down world. Meanwhile, Joyce has been waiting by the phone all day, and it finally rings again with Will calling for her. But the call is cut short, and the phone is burnt and destroyed. The lights in the house flicker, and Will's favorite rock music plays from his empty bedroom. When Joyce opens the door, she finds no one inside, but a lamp shines unusually bright before all the lights go out. The shape of a monster appears on the wall, and Joyce, terrified, flees the house. She wants to drive away but hears music from inside, as if it's trying to communicate with her. Ultimately, her love for her son compels her to return. At the same time, Nancy goes to her boyfriend Steve's party without telling her parents. She's usually well-behaved and has never done this before, so she brings her best friend for support. Her friend tries to convince her not to go, as Steve's intentions are obvious. But Nancy, blinded by love, doesn't listen. Her friend reluctantly tags along as a third wheel. Meanwhile, Jonathan goes to the forest to take photos of the places Will has been. He hears a girl screaming in the distance and finds Nancy and her friends playing a game. Nancy's friend gets injured while opening a bottle, so she goes to the bathroom to tend to her wound. Steve takes this opportunity to push Nancy into the pool and playfully splash around. They then spend some time alone and engage in intimate activities. Jonathan, who has feelings for Nancy, takes some photos of the scene. He sees Nancy's friend sitting alone by the pool, her blood dripping into the water. Suddenly, the lights flash, and the mouth of a monster appears behind her. In the blink of an eye, her friend disappears. Unfortunately, Jonathan was looking down at his camera and missed the monster's appearance. The friend is dragged by the monster into a gloomy world filled with floating particles and slimy, writhing chunks of flesh on the ground. A faceless creature with shriveled limbs stands behind her. In a panic, she tries to climb the chunks of flesh, but the monster quickly pulls her back down. Nancy and Steve spent the night together until the early hours of the morning. They hurriedly got dressed and prepared to leave, but Nancy couldn't find her best friend outside. She didn't have time to search for her, so she went home. When her mother asked her where she got the jacket she was wearing, Nancy admitted it was Steve's, but lied that they were just classmates. The next morning, Jonathan was woken up by his mother calling for Will. He thought his younger brother had returned, so he quickly got dressed and went to see. But only his mother was in the room, surrounded by lights, talking to herself. She was trying to communicate with Will like she did the night before. Suddenly, a light bulb flickered, but Jonathan dismissed it as an electrical issue. Joyce mentioned strange events happening with the walls, but Jonathan thought she was hallucinating and advised her to get some rest. But Joyce didn't believe she was hallucinating. Taking advantage of Jonathan's absence, she took out Christmas lights and intended to cover the entire house with them, but the string wasn't long enough. She went to the supermarket and bought a cart full of colored lights, decorating the walls and ceiling with a colorful display. At that time, Mike's mother brought his little sister over to visit and have a heart-to-heart chat with Joyce. The little girl got bored and yawned, noticing the hallway lights suddenly turning on. She curiously walked over and followed the lights into Will's room, where the desk lamp flickered and a monster seemed to emerge from the wall by the window. When the two adults came to check, the wall returned to normal. Will's mother urgently asked the little girl if she had seen anything, and her frantic behavior surprised Mike's mother. Joyce was furious because the visit had made her miss the chance to communicate with her son, so she sent the visitors away. Meanwhile, after 11 agreed to help, the three kids quickly planned an expedition into the forest. Lucas brought out his long-collected tools, while Dustin only prepared snacks. After all, 11 was their real strength, so they focused on bringing enough food to replenish their energy. Dustin wanted 11 to demonstrate her telekinetic powers again and placed a spaceship model in front of her, but the spaceship didn't take off. Mike's mother urged them to go to school, so he gave 11 his wristwatch and agreed to meet at the power line tower outside at 3:15 p.m. When no one was home, 11 made the spaceship float. She had been trained in a lab and had once used her thoughts to deform a soda can quickly, but overloading her brain caused her body to suffer, so her nose would bleed every time she used her telekinetic powers. Nancy had arrived at school and realized her best friend was absent. She asked her classmates who hadn't seen her and called her friend's family, who said she hadn't come home the night before. During lunch with her boyfriend, she asked about the party, but the others didn't care about her friend and were still immersed in the passion of the previous night. This made Nancy even more worried. Just then, Jonathan happened to see her but kept walking. He had come to school to develop photos in the darkroom. One photo after another was developed and hung on a string to dry, but a girl accidentally discovered them. This girl was one of Steve's followers, and she revealed that Jonathan had taken pictures of Nancy. Steve grabbed the photos, tore them up, and pretended to accidentally break Jonathan's camera. Jonathan was furious but dared not say anything. Nancy picked up the photos from the ground and found one of her friends among them. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hopper went with his team to investigate the energy lab. They were stopped by the guards at the entrance, who insisted that Hopper needed a permit. Hopper tried to reason with them, pointing out that the missing child case had attracted significant media and public attention. He assured them that he didn't believe the child was inside, but still needed to check for 10 minutes as part of the procedure. The guards didn't want to escalate the situation, so they called their manager. The manager explained that every inch of the facility was under surveillance, with numerous guards stationed around the lab. He claimed that not even a fly could enter, let alone a child. Hopper requested to see the surveillance footage, and the manager obliged. However, the footage from the past 2 days was finished in less than a minute. Hopper questioned the validity of the footage, since it didn't show the heavy rain on the night the child went missing. Hopper knew someone had tampered with the footage, but didn't want to alert them to his suspicion. He and his team went to the library to look up all the news related to the laboratory. They discovered chilling information about the lab's involvement in secret mind control experiments, all approved by the CIA. The people in the newspaper photos wore the same clothes as the ones found in the sewers. Hopper suspected a conspiracy and believed that Will might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, seeing something he shouldn't have, and was consequently eliminated by the lab. There had been a case where a mother accused the lab of kidnapping her daughter, who turned out to be 11. The mother was later declared mentally unstable. 11 kept her promise to Mike and waited by the power line tower. A wild cat nearby hissed aggressively at her, reminding her of a cat in the lab. It turned out that Dr. Brenner wanted to train her as a killer, asking her to use her telekinesis to kill a cat. 11 couldn't do it and was put in solitary confinement. She was dragged into a small room by 2 men, but 11 fought back, using her telekinesis to knock them out. Her actions earned Dr. Brenner's praise, but his rare affection wasn't a happy memory for 11. It filled her with fear. Just then, Mike and his 2 friends arrived, interrupting her reminiscing. The 4 children rode their bikes into the woods. Along the way, 11 pointed to a scar on Mike's chin and asked about it. Mike initially lied, saying he had fallen and hit the ground. 11 reminded him of the importance of honesty among friends and questioned his lie. Mike reluctantly told her the truth about how he and his friends had been picking up rocks for their slingshots when the school bully tripped him, causing him to hit his chin on the ground. He didn't want 11 to think he was weak, which is why he had hidden the truth. While the kids' group was searching for the missing Will, Nancy was also looking for her friend's whereabouts. She found her friend's car, but no one was inside. She then went to Steve's villa, but no one was by the pool either. However, strange noises came from the nearby woods. As she entered the woods, a faceless monster flashed before her eyes. Terrified, Nancy ran away for her shitty life. The monster didn't harm her because it had another target. The lights in Will's house started to flicker again, and his mom knew it was Will trying to communicate with her. She hugged a lamp and asked if it was him. After receiving a positive response, she played a question-and-answer game with him. 1 flash meant yes, and 2 flashes meant no. Will indicated that he was alive but not safe. But when Joyce wanted to know where her son was, a yes or no answer was insufficient. She quickly wrote the 26 letters of the alphabet on the wall and had Will control the corresponding lights. To her surprise, Will said he's right here, followed by the letters run, urging her to run away immediately. The lights in the house started flashing non-stop, and the faceless monster emerged from the wall behind her. Joyce screamed in a chicken voice and ran out of the house. When the 3 children arrived at Will's house, they couldn't see the situation inside. 11 insisted that Will was hiding there. The other children didn't believe her and thought she was lying. As they argued, several police cars and an ambulance raced past them in the distance. The children thought they had found Will and quickly followed on their bikes. They rushed to the quarry's pond, where Hopper had already arrived. The police pulled a child's body from the water. Although they were far away, Mike and his friends thought the dead child was Will. 11 tried to comfort Mike, but he shook her hand off. Mike accused 11, saying she had promised to help them find Will alive, but had lied to them. He immediately rode his bike away. 11 had no chance to defend herself under Mike's barrage of accusations. Their friendship seemed to be over. Meanwhile, Joyce, who had escaped the house, ran into her older son. She sobbed in his arms. When Hopper learned about her encounter at home, he didn't even carefully confirm the identity of the body. He quickly brought his officers to check the situation. Although the lights in the house were all off, there were no signs of damage on the walls. Hopper told Joyce about finding the body, and she looked dazed, her ears ringing. Holding the colored lights, she explained that her child was still alive, just hiding from the monster. To save Will from danger, they had to find him quickly. However, nobody believed her story about the faceless monster with long arms and legs. Hopper had a similar experience when he lost his daughter. He often had hallucinations just like Joyce. He told her to go to the morgue the next day to identify the body, and then she would face reality. Joyce sat in the living room with an axe all night, but the monster she imagined never appeared, and she had no way to prove her claims. She could only go with her older son to identify the body. Hopper sat in the waiting area, wondering why it was taking so long for the 2 to come out. He asked the front desk staff and found out that the town's coroner had been sent home. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Will was from the state. If a child simply drowned, it wouldn't have involved the state authorities, even if the quarry was in another district. Something was off about this case. As expected, Joyce and Jonathan could only view the body through a window. The person lying inside did look a lot like Will, but she remembered that Will had a birthmark. She asked the medical examiner to lift the sheet so she could see. When she came out, she firmly refused to sign the identification form and stormed out without giving the medical examiner a chance to discuss it further. Jonathan thought his mother didn't want to face reality and chased after her, telling her to be strong and prepare for the funeral. Joyce argued with him in the street, insisting Will was still alive and waiting to be rescued. Meanwhile, 11, who knew the truth, returned to Mike's house and went to the basement to tinker with the radio. Mike was upset and asked 11 to give him some space. She didn't explain herself, and suddenly Will's singing came through the radio. Mike quickly spoke into the radio, but there was no response, and the singing stopped. 11's nose began to bleed again, and Mike realized she used her powers. Will was indeed not dead. That day, Mike faked illness to skip school. After his parents left, he called Dustin and Lucas to come over. But when they arrived, 11 couldn't find Will's signal. Dustin suspected that Mike had hallucinated, mistaking a neighbor's baby's cries for Will. The police had pulled a body from the water the night before, indicating he was dead. Mike couldn't explain the body, but he believed Will was alive. 11 couldn't contact him because the home radio signal was too weak. They needed to find stronger equipment. Their teacher's radio receiver and transmitter was the obvious choice. The device was at school, so they had to take 11 there, but it could expose her identity. Mike had a bright idea and disguised her. Dustin and Lucas helped choose a wig and a dress. Though 11 was a girl, this was the first time she had dressed up. She looked stunning, and Mike couldn't take his eyes off her. But they had to focus on the task at hand and hurried to school. As they entered, their teacher stopped them. The school was holding a memorial for Will, and everyone had to attend. The teacher handed Mike the key to the radio room, saying they could play there as long as they wanted after the event, but not now. The atmosphere in the stadium was solemn, and the school bully, who had tormented them, was smirking in the crowd. Mike was furious. After the memorial, he bravely confronted the bully. The bully didn't expect Mike to fight back and was ready to retaliate when he suddenly couldn't move. He even wet his pants in front of everyone, causing laughter among the onlookers. Mike turned around to see 11 wiping her nosebleed, realizing she had helped him get revenge. Nancy, who also encountered the faceless monster, reported it to the police along with the disappearance of her friend. The police investigated Steve's house, but neither found the monster nor Nancy. Even her car had vanished without a trace. They assumed that her friend might have run away from home, but Nancy was sure she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. The two police officers knew about the party that night and hypothesized in front of Nancy's mother that jealousy might have driven her friend away after seeing Nancy enter Steve's room. Nancy quickly denied that she and Steve were anything more than friends. However, the officers delivered a devastating blow, asking if that was before or after she changed clothes. This revelation left Nancy's mother in shock. Back at home, she questioned her daughter about the situation, and Nancy reluctantly admitted the truth. However, she was more concerned about her missing friend, but nobody believed her. In her room, Nancy took out the last photo of her friend, which was taken by chance and later torn apart by Steve. Carefully, she used tape to piece the photo back together. She suddenly noticed a shadow of the monster at the edge of the picture. She quickly went to find Will's brother, who was in the process of selecting a coffin, and told him about the faceless creature. Because his mother had mentioned it too, it seemed unlikely that two unrelated people would have hallucinations. This revelation shook Will's brother, and he temporarily abandoned the idea of holding a funeral. He took Nancy to the school's darkroom to redevelop the photo. After increasing the brightness, the faceless monster indeed appeared in the picture, and he finally believed that what his mother said was true. Meanwhile, Hopper returned to the police station to talk to the town's coroner. The coroner confirmed that someone from the state had come, and there were 6 officers to transport the body. This was odd, as Will was not a high-profile figure like Kennedy. Hopper suspected someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, but their attempt to cover up only exposed more. He found the officer who reported the incident and gave him a good beating. The officer confessed that he was just a small fry who took money to do the job, ensuring no one got close to the body. He had no idea who was behind it, and if Hopper kept asking, they would both be in deep trouble. Hopper noticed someone watching them from the roadside and immediately chased after them with his gun. The watcher quickly drove away, and the officer also fled when Hopper let go of him. The trail of clues ended there. In truth, Dr. Brenner didn't consider Hopper a threat and let him continue his investigation while focusing on his experiments. He and a group of fully armed people entered the incident area, selecting a bold man to wear a more advanced protective suit, complete with a rope attached to the back. They then peeled away the fleshy growth on the wall and entered. However, there was no response for a long time after they went in. Dr. Brenner tried to contact the man via radio, but all he heard were crackling electric noises, faint gasps of swallowing food, and screams of terror. The lab was suddenly filled with flashing red lights, and Dr. Brenner immediately ordered a rescue. But when they pulled the rope back, all they found were bloody remnants of the protective suit. At the school, the 4 children turned on the radio, and 11 sat at the table with her eyes closed. The scene shifted to the lab in the past, where Dr. Brenner had once given her a photo and asked her to find the person in it and relay their words. 11 had only glanced at the photo before closing her eyes and finding the person reading words in a room. The room's lights suddenly went out, and the person's voice came through the radio. This time, she replicated the process, and darkness quickly enveloped their surroundings. The radio transmitted knocking sounds, and at the same time, Joyce played rock music at home, trying to contact her missing son. She heard noises coming from the living room wall and Will's call for help. The mother and son's conversation was simultaneously transmitted to the school's radio. When Joyce ran outside, she saw no one. She returned inside and tore the wallpaper off, revealing that the wooden wall had turned into a transparent barrier with crimson flesh stuck to it. Will pleaded for help, telling his mother that he was in a dark place that resembled their home. He wanted to say more, but the monster was already approaching. The wall returned to normal, and Joyce grabbed an axe to smash the wall. However, she only created a hole, revealing no trace of her son or another world, just a desolate landscape and a helpless, worried mother. At the same time, the radio at the school suddenly caught fire, triggering the fire alarm. Dustin grabbed a fire extinguisher to put out the fire, and then they all fled the scene. 11, weakened by overusing her powers, had to be carried away by the others. The boys brought her back to Mike's basement and began discussing the meaning of Will's words. He said he was hiding at home, but the surroundings were cold and dark. They wondered if 11's guidance on the back of the board game and leading them to Will's house indicated that he was in another world, invisible to ordinary people. Dustin thought of the Dark Valley, a story about a dark reflection of the real world, filled with decay and death, close yet unseen. At that point, Hopper returned to the morgue and found an excuse to visit the room where Will's body was kept. As expected, there were state troopers guarding it. Hopper initially tried to deceive them, but they were not easily fooled. Left with no choice, he knocked them out with his fists. He rushed to the body in the morgue freezer and upon seeing it, was overcome with grief. However, when he touched it, he noticed something strange. The body that looked like Will was too soft. Hopper sighed with relief and proceeded to slice open the body's stomach, revealing it was full of white stuffing. No wonder the state medical examiner had taken over. Hopper was now convinced that Will was trapped in the lab. Determined, he drove there late at night and cut through the lab's protective fence. As soon as he entered the lab building, he was spotted by surveillance cameras. The manager arrived, gun in hand, and demanded Hopper surrender. Hopper quickly thought on his feet, claiming he had been invited by Dr. Brenner. The manager tried to call to confirm, but the moment he let his guard down, Hopper knocked him out. The nearby guards also lost their weapons, and Hopper used their credentials to open the door. To his surprise, the inside was like a maze, and he couldn't find any trace of Will. He did find a child's bedroom with a hand-drawn cartoon on the wall. It must have been 11's room. Hopper continued to search, eventually barging into the incident area. He braved the murky air and went down to the bottom, where he saw the massive tumor occupying the entire wall. As he reached out to touch it, a dark shadow suddenly flashed behind him. Turning around, he found himself face to face with the approaching guards. Caught off guard, Hopper was injected with a sedative and passed out on the spot. One clear morning, Jonathan rushed back home from the dark room. He had heard about his mother smashing the wall with an axe and wanted to ask her what to do next. However, his father, who came to attend the funeral, stopped him. Jonathan had no choice but to put on his funeral attire and, accompanied by the prayers of the priest and others, ended the fake funeral. But in his heart, he had a plan. Since no one believed in the monster's existence, he would wait for proof before announcing it. He took out his gun and ammunition, preparing to kill the monster with Nancy. However, neither of them had fighting experience, so they had to learn on the spot. One practiced swinging a baseball bat at home, while the other practiced shooting in the wild. At this time, Joyce returned home, and her ex-husband was attentively busy trying to persuade her to demand huge compensation from the quarry. Her ex-husband had been indifferent when Will went missing, but after the death was confirmed, he became proactive. This saddened Joyce, and as expected, they argued. Her ex-husband pointed at the colorful lights filling the house and called her crazy. Furious, Will's mom kicked him out of the house. By mealtime, the kids had found their teacher and asked him how to enter the upside-down world. The teacher was pleased with their curiosity and explained that creating a massive amount of energy could tear a rift in time and space, forming a passage connecting the two worlds. But if such a path appeared, it could disrupt gravity and magnetic fields, possibly even consuming everything. The children didn't care about the consequences and returned to the basement to ponder. Since Will had entered the upside-down world, it meant that the passage already existed. Dustin then had everyone take out their compasses, which would automatically point to the magnetic North Pole. However, their compass needles were fluctuating, indicating a strong magnetic field nearby affecting them. According to their teacher, this might mean that if they followed the direction of the compass, they could find the path to the reverse world. The children quickly packed up and hit the road, but after walking for half a day, the four of them seemed to be trapped in a maze, going in circles. Dustin suspected something was interfering with them, and Lucas immediately realized it must be 11, who had supernatural powers. Lucas had always been suspicious of her, thinking she was a monster. This time, her behavior on the road was unusual and unwilling, and she even wiped her nose. He checked 11's sleeve and saw bloodstains. 11 quickly admitted it, explaining that the upside down, a dark reflection of the real world, was not safe. But before she could finish explaining, Lucas accused her of being a traitor and only getting close to them for food and shelter. Mike didn't believe 11 was using him, especially since she had helped contact Will. But Lucas kept on accusing, saying that if Will died, it would be 11's fault, and even claimed that Mike was defending her because he was bewitched by her. Lucas said something hurtful, calling 11 a monster. Mike couldn't stand these words and fought with Lucas. Dustin couldn't calm 11 down, and in her desperation, she used her telekinesis. Lucas was thrown back, hitting a piece of iron and passing out. Mike scolded 11, saying they were just playing around and she shouldn't have used so much force. This left 11 dumbfounded, as memories from her past popped into her mind. Because of her supernatural abilities, she was trained by the lab. Initially, she was used to steal Soviet intelligence. Wearing specially designed clothes and submerged in a device filled with liquid, her powers could be amplified. As long as she had seen a Soviet officer's photo, she could enter their consciousness and hear what they were saying. Although 11 didn't understand, she could still transmit the words to the doctor via radio. All they needed was a translator. Suddenly, a noise echoed in the mental space and the officer's figure disappeared. Scared, 11 ran and shouted for help from within the device, but nobody let her out. The feeling of despair and fear still haunts her to this day. After some time, Lucas finally woke up. Thankfully, he wasn't seriously injured, but he decided to part ways with his friends. Almost losing his life, he couldn't stay with them any longer. Mike turned his attention to 11 and realized she was gone too. On the other side, Hopper woke up on his couch at home. He grabbed his gun and rushed outside, but nobody was watching him, and he wasn't injured. It seemed that Dr. Brenner didn't consider him a threat, but Hopper knew he wouldn't be easily let off the hook. Searching his house, he indeed found a hidden bug in the lamp. Dr. Brenner had done this kind of thing more than once. They even monitored the entire town's wireless signals. Their signal from the night before had been intercepted, and they immediately sent people to the school to inspect the damaged transceiver. It bore traces of 11's powers that had been used. Hopper knew he was caught in a conspiracy and might not have a chance to survive. He called his ex-wife, who lived far away in the city, and asked her to take care of herself. Afterward, he went to find Will's mother, Joyce. Handing her a piece of paper, he gestured for her not to speak until he checked the house for bugs. Once he confirmed the house was secure, he finally felt comfortable talking to her. He told her about the fake corpse and that he was being watched. He believed that Will was taken by the lab and became their test subject. However, he hadn't seen Will in person and only made this assumption based on the child's room. Joyce asked if he could describe the room. Hopper said there was only a simple sketch and a few animal toys. She smiled, showing him Will's doodle, saying that it wasn't Will's room. Although her younger son wasn't very clever, his drawings were outstanding. Hopper quickly realized that he remembered a regular customer at the burger joint had seen a kid, but couldn't remember their appearance, only that they had a buzz cut. The police followed the customer's clue and found the lab. The lab had a history of kidnapping children. One record involved a woman named Terry who claimed her daughter was taken. She later sued the government and Dr. Brenner, but the case was dismissed due to CIA intervention. Now, thinking back, that room probably belonged to the little girl. Late one night, Jonathan and Nancy, armed with gear, searched the forest for the monster. Suddenly, they heard the groaning of a wild beast nearby. Approaching the sound, they discovered a badly injured deer. The deer was suddenly pulled into the darkness, and neither of them could see what took it. Following the trail of blood left by the deer, Nancy found a tree hollow dripping with water, surrounded by sticky chunks of flesh. She took a risk and crawled inside, only to end up in a dusty, upside-down world. Not far away, a monster was feasting on the deer's carcass. Terrified, Nancy held her breath, trying to back away carefully, but she still caught the monster's attention. Outside, Jonathan heard a scream and rushed over, only to find Nancy's backpack on the ground. Nancy had vanished, and the tree hollow was slowly healing itself. Jonathan urged her to follow the sound of his voice. In the nick of time, she managed to reach out her arm for help. Jonathan quickly pulled her out, and the tree hollow closed just behind them. Shaken by the experience, they gathered their belongings and went home to calm their nerves. Steve felt that Nancy had been unusually cold toward him lately. He decided to climb through her window to rekindle the excitement they once shared, accompanied by his sidekicks. However, just as he climbed up, he saw Jonathan covering Nancy with a jacket, leaving Steve feeling like he was standing in a vast green field. The next day, Hopper obtained Terry's address and went to visit her with Joyce. To their surprise, Terry's sister answered the door, informing them that they were 5 years too late. Terry had lost her sanity and couldn't answer any questions. It turned out that 12 years ago, Terry was part of a mind control group, but in the drug-infested America of the 1950s, the group was full of addicts. The CIA found them and offered drugs and money in exchange for their participation in experiments. The group members were stripped naked and placed in isolation tanks filled with salt water, where they lost their senses and supposedly expanded their minds, gaining abilities unbound by human limitations or geography. Terry was forced to participate in the experiments, unaware that she was pregnant. After giving birth, the lab declared that she had miscarried, but Terry knew she had a daughter with supernatural powers, capable of telepathy and remote object manipulation. Dr. Brenner took her child and trained her as a political weapon. Of course, no one believed Terry's story, and the hospital didn't provide any proof. Later, Terry sued Dr. Brenner but lacked evidence, so she prepared a room for her daughter at home, waiting for her return. Seeing Terry's current state, Joyce was filled with sadness, wondering if her son Will would ever return after being taken by the lab. Meanwhile, Nancy and Jonathan decided to go back and hunt the monster to save people, but they had to make a plan first. According to the scene they saw last night, Nancy believed that the monster was a carnivore that hunted at night. It always acted alone and was highly sensitive to the smell of blood, so they needed to set a trap to lure the monster. The pair went to the hardware store and bought a large number of tools they didn't usually use at home, which left the store owner astonished. He couldn't help but ask what the two kids were planning to do with the tools. Nancy answered they were used to hunt monsters. However, when they left the store with their equipment, they encountered Steve's sidekicks provoking them. They then saw graffiti on the movie theater marquee, spreading rumors that Nancy was promiscuous. Nancy confronted Steve and slapped him, while Jonathan knocked him down with a few punches. As a result, patrolling police arrived, and Steve's group fled for their shitty lives, leaving Nancy and Jonathan to be taken to the police station. On the other side, Sheriff Hopper received a call from a subordinate, learning that Jonathan had been arrested. He and Joyce immediately rushed to the police station. Inside, a female officer tried to persuade Nancy not to be blinded by love, as it could lead to impulsive mistakes. Nancy said that Jonathan wasn't her boyfriend, but the officer continued to tease her, saying that only love could drive people crazy. These words struck a chord with Nancy, causing her to blush when treating Jonathan's wounds. At the same time, the door to the teacher's house was knocked on. The visitor was the hitman who had killed the burger joint's owner. The lab had previously wiretapped the communications of the three kids, who were searching for their missing friend, Will. So they sent the hitman disguised as someone else to trick the teacher into handing over information about the kids. The teacher was intelligent but naive, handing over the information without investigating. Meanwhile, Mike skipped school and stayed at home while Eleven was gone all night. He was growing increasingly worried, as the young girl had no relatives to turn to in the small town and might face danger on her own. Dustin urged him to stay calm, as now was not the time to panic and wet his pants. Dustin said that all three of them had made mistakes. Lucas couldn't keep his mouth shut and blamed Mike for starting it all, while 11 had unintentionally made the situation worse. So Dustin tried to be the peacemaker, helping Lucas reconcile with Mike and then finding 11. The two of them agreed and immediately rode their Tesla bikes to Lucas's house. Mike tried to apologize, but Lucas had his principles. They could make up, but they couldn't associate with 11 anymore. Mike firmly believed that 11 only wanted to protect them, so he disagreed with this condition. Dustin emphasized the importance of unity, as they would be defeated one by the Demon Lord if they weren't united. Moreover, 11 was their muscle, and they couldn't afford to lose her. Unfortunately, no one listened to Dustin's smelly bullshit. Lucas and Mike had another falling out, and Lucas decided to save Will on his own. He packed his weapons and left, following the compass until he reached the edge of the lab's restricted area. Surrounded by protective fences, he had to climb a tree and use binoculars to observe the situation. To his surprise, he made an important discovery. Several white vans looked just like the one parked in front of his house. On 11's end, she had spent the night sleeping in the forest and woke up hungry and a bit disoriented. She stumbled upon a supermarket and went inside. However, she began to hallucinate, and the people around her appeared to be researchers, with Dr. Brenner urging her to get up and enter a container filled with salt water. In the salt water, 11's powers were amplified, allowing her to enter the minds of others. This time, though, the space she entered was pitch black. Her mission was not to steal information, but to find the monster she saw during her last immersion. Suddenly, someone asked her if she was lost. 11 snapped back to reality, realizing that she was not in the lab. She boldly took some food from the supermarket and left. Soon after, Mike and Dustin passed by the supermarket, seeing the chaotic scene and believing it was related to 11. After all, there hadn't been a robbery or a natural event shattering glass in the small town for decades. Worried about 11, they hurried into the forest, only to run into the school bullies. Mike and Dustin abandoned their Tesla bikes and ran like Forrest Gump, eventually finding themselves on the edge of a cliff, surrounded by the bullies. Dustin picked up a branch, ready to fight, but one of the bullies restrained him and held a knife to his neck. The bully demanded that Mike jump off the cliff, otherwise they would knock out the rest of Dustin's rotten teeth. Concerned for his friend's safety, Mike hesitantly walked to the edge of the cliff and leaped off. As he fell, a powerful force pulled him back up. Everyone was stunned, as if they had just witnessed a miracle. 11 then emerged, her nose bleeding. In no time, she beat up the bullies and drove them away. She appeared more like a goddess to Mike than a person with supernatural powers. However, due to overusing her abilities, she fainted. Her consciousness returned to the dark space, where she saw the monster feeding. Although scared, 11, who had accepted Dr. Brenner's orders, approached the creature. Suddenly, the monster turned and opened its massive jaws, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Fear swelled within her, and 11's powers spiraled out of control. The entire lab was flooded with warning lights, and a wall began to crack and fracture, eventually being overtaken by a large mass of flesh that appeared to be a living organism. It turned out that 11 had opened the portal to the Upside Down. When she woke up, she apologized to Mike and Dustin, who didn't blame her for the events. They regarded her as an important friend, and the trio headed home. However, they were being watched by the suspicious van parked outside. 11's whereabouts had been leaked, and Dr. Brenner, armed with an array of weapons and guards, set out from the lab. Lucas, who was perched in a tree, saw everything and hurriedly contacted Mike through a walkie-talkie. Dustin glanced outside the window and saw several cars approaching, filled with rough-looking individuals. He quickly alerted Mike, and they escaped with 11 and Lucas through the back door. Dr. Brenner spotted them fleeing and gave chase in his vehicle. The young group banded together, with cars hot on their tail and even coming at them from the front. It seemed impossible for them to escape on their bikes, but 11 used her powers once more, sending a car flying over their heads. This move blocked the path of the pursuers and bought the group enough time to escape. They managed to reach an abandoned car factory unscathed. Now, Lucas realized that the danger 11 had warned them about was real, so he apologized to her and admitted he shouldn't have insulted her. 11 then told him that friends don't lie. Mike extended his hand in friendship to Lucas, and the group reconciled, united once again. On the other side, Sheriff Hopper and Joyce rushed to the police station and saw Jonathan handcuffed. Hopper ordered his subordinate to remove the handcuffs, but instead, the subordinate led him to the trunk of the car, which was filled with tools used for committing crimes. This put Hopper in a difficult position, so he asked Jonathan to explain. With no other choice, he revealed the information about the monster. Before Hopper could make sense of the situation, they suddenly heard someone arguing outside. It turned out to be the school bully's mother causing trouble. The bully had his arm broken by 11 and wanted to seek justice at the police station. Hopper didn't take it seriously, allowing his subordinate to take a statement and send them away. Then he heard the bully mention that the perpetrator was a girl with a buzz cut and the power to make people fly. Hopper immediately thought of Terry's missing daughter and asked for more details, finally learning about 11 and her adventures with the boys. Meanwhile, Dr. Brenner hadn't given up on capturing 11 and searched Mike's house with his team, questioning Mike's parents about whether they were hiding her. The couple had been kept in the dark and knew nothing about the situation, becoming furious at the CIA agents barging in. Knowing they were now fugitives, the group of friends actively discussed how to infiltrate the lab. According to information from Lucas, there might be an entrance to the Upside Down there. Just then, the boys noticed a plane in the sky and quickly hid their bikes under an abandoned bus, hiding inside as well. Soon, Hopper learned about the kids' predicament and contacted Mike through a walkie-talkie. Mike was afraid it was a trap, but hearing Sheriff Hopper's voice, they decided to take a chance and reveal their hiding place. However, after waiting a long time in the bus, they finally saw someone approaching. It was the lab's henchman. They quickly hid, cursing under their breath. The doctor had intercepted their radio signal and discovered their location. Just as the henchman was about to open the bus door, he was knocked out by a punch from Hopper, who then appeared with his gun. The children looked at him with respect. With no time to lose, they rushed to Will's house to regroup. Mike and the others explained the existence of the Upside Down and 11's powers. Joyce and Nancy found it hard to believe, but wanted 11 to try contacting Will and Nancy's missing friend. 11 attempted to do so, but failed, as her powers were weakening from overuse. However, upon seeing the bathtub in the bathroom, 11 suddenly thought of a method. If she could create the saline device from the lab, perhaps it could amplify her abilities. So Dustin called his teacher at 10 p.m. on Saturday night to inquire about the details of making a sensory deprivation tank. The teacher, who was enjoying a romantic evening with his girlfriend, brushed him off, saying they could discuss it at school on Monday. Reluctantly, Dustin flattered the teacher, who then sacrificed his romantic night to remotely teach Dustin for the sake of his student's future. First, they needed to prepare hundreds of kilograms of salt, which the supermarket didn't have in stock. Hopper had no choice but to use the stockpile the school kept for snow days. They filled a children's swimming pool at the school's sports field, checking the water temperature to ensure it was just right. Then they gradually added the salt until an egg floated to the surface, signaling that the sensory deprivation tank was ready. Mike placed the walkie-talkie beside the pool, and 11 put on a blindfold, bravely overcoming her fear and submerging herself in the water. In order to save her friends, she entered the mental realm. Guided by her telepathic powers, she quickly found Nancy's friend, but she was already dead, with disgusting bugs crawling out of her mouth. The horrifying and nauseating scene made 11 scream in terror, becoming emotionally unstable. Fortunately, Joyce and the others were there to comfort her, helping her regain her composure. 11 then saw Will's secret hideout, went inside, and found a weak Will lying on a bed. She conveyed his mother's message, telling him to stay strong and wait for help. But before she could finish, Will and his hideout suddenly disappeared, and 11 woke up from the shock. With the location of Will's hideout now clear, Hopper and Joyce drove off, heading towards the restricted area of the laboratory. They cut through the protective fence, planning to enter the Upside Down to save Will. Jonathan wanted to help, but was rejected by his mother, so he went to accompany the distraught Nancy instead. Although Nancy was heartbroken over her friend's death, her mind remained clear, and she believed that Hopper and Joyce entering the Upside Down was undoubtedly a bait for the monster, with slim chances of escape. Nancy planned to set a trap for the monster from both inside and outside, so she and Jonathan quietly returned to the police station. Taking advantage of the night shift officer's negligence, they stole back the equipment they had purchased earlier. However, things didn't go smoothly for Hopper. After the break-in last time, the lab had heightened its security level. As soon as they entered, they were surrounded by guards. Outnumbered, they had no choice but to surrender. Inside the lab, Dr. Brenner tried to persuade Joyce, saying that 6 people had been taken by the monster this week, mostly children, and that he sympathized with the pain of losing a child. He wanted to save them and save her son, but he needed her help. However, Joyce now knew the truth about the fake bodies and saw through his pretense of benevolence. Meanwhile, Hopper was subjected to electric shocks and interrogations. He claimed to have already informed his journalist friend of the lab's conspiracy, who would expose everything. However, he offered Dr. Brenner a chance: release him and Joyce and provide equipment for entering the Upside Down. If they could rescue Will, they would forget everything that happened here. The doctor's goal was to capture 11, and Hopper said he could tell him where she was hiding. But in addition to the previous conditions, he had to ensure the safety of the 3 children. Dr. Brenner agreed immediately, seeing Hopper and Joyce as potential test subjects in a profitable deal. He provided them with 2 protective suits, allowing them to enter the affected area, and then turned around to lead an army to capture 11. In the Upside Down, the air was foul and filled with toxic gases. The environment was entirely dark and damp. Joyce struggled to cope as soon as she entered, and Hopper had to teach her how to control her breathing rhythm time and time again. This reminded Hopper of his late daughter, who had a weak constitution and struggled to breathe during strenuous activities. He had learned to guide her breathing while taking care of her. Little did he know that years later, this small trick would come in handy. After some time, they finally found the secret hideout, but it was in ruins and Will was nowhere to be found. On the other side, Jonathan and Nancy began setting up traps. They hung up all the colored lights, placed mouse traps on the floor, and poured gasoline. They added nails to a baseball bat to create a spiked club and filled the revolver's bullets to the brim. Then, they cut their palms to let fresh blood flow out. However, they waited and waited, but the monster never appeared. Instead, someone knocked on the door outside. It was Steve, his face bruised. He realized his mistake in the graffiti incident and came to apologize in the middle of the night. Before he could finish speaking, he saw Nancy's injured hand and assumed Jonathan had hurt her. He barged in, ready to fight. Nancy and Jonathan tried to send him away. At that moment, the colored lights began to flicker, and the monster crawled out of the ceiling, scaring the 3 of them as they hid in a small room. Suddenly, everything outside became quiet again, and the monster disappeared. None of the traps were triggered. Steve, frightened, slammed the door and ran away. When he reached the car, he saw the lights inside the house flicker again. After hesitating for a moment, he turned back and swung the spiked club at the monster. The monster was caught off guard and was momentarily stunned. It stepped into a trap, and Jonathan immediately set the gasoline alight. The raging fire burned the monster, causing it to shriek and howl. But when the fire was extinguished, only a charred, severed leg and a scorched floor remained. The seriously injured monster had escaped. Inside the Upside Down, Joyce found her own house. The furnishings were the same as in the real world. There were traces of the monster's blood in the hallway, leading all the way to the door. Hopper realized the monster was injured, and although he couldn't understand the reason, he followed the blood trail to the monster's lair. Meanwhile, the kids were still at the stadium. Mike noticed that his sister and Jonathan were gone. He felt that they couldn't just sit idly by and had to take action. However, Lucas and Dustin disagreed because they were all fugitives and bad people outside wanted to catch them. What's worse, 11 was weak from frequently using her powers and hadn't fully recovered. Hopper insisted that they hide and ensure their own safety, and Mike reluctantly abandoned the idea of taking action. The children found the cafeteria, rummaged through the refrigerator for enough food to fill their stomachs, and Mike confided his true feelings to 11. Once everything was over, he would explain everything to his parents and give 11 her own room. But 11 asked if he would be her brother, but Mike said that it was incomparable. 11 didn't understand and didn't know what kind of riddle he was playing. To make 11 understand, Mike leaned in and kissed her. With that one kiss, 11 suddenly understood Mike's feelings. At that moment, car headlights approached from outside. Mike thought Nancy had returned, and he excitedly ran outside to greet her. To his surprise, he found Dr. Brenner, accompanied by a large group of henchmen surrounding the area. The children ran towards the exits, but all the escape routes were guarded. They were trapped like turtles in a jar. In the nick of time, 11 used her powers again, knocking the bad guys down. However, she also collapsed from exhaustion. Dr. Brenner and his men appeared, but suddenly the lights started flickering. It turned out that a large amount of blood had attracted the monster. The kids took advantage of the chaos to carry 11 away, while the others began shooting at the monster. But the monster seemed unfazed by the bullets and quickly killed Dr. Brenner with a single leap. At that moment, the monster's lair was left unguarded. Hopper and Joyce easily made their way inside. The air was even more polluted here, with sticky chunks of flesh tangled around countless bones. Will was also wrapped in these fleshy chunks with an unknown object lodged in his mouth. Hopper forcefully pulled it out, only to discover it was a disgusting creature. He used his gun to shoot it dead, then dragged Will out of the flesh. Will was unresponsive at this point, so Hopper administered first aid. Will soon coughed up the foreign object, regaining consciousness. Hopper wasted no time and put an oxygen mask on him. Meanwhile, the kids were being pursued by the monster. Lucas had no choice but to use his slingshot, but the stones seemed to have no effect. The monster was getting closer and closer, and just as they were about to run out of stones, Lucas mustered all his strength and released the slingshot. The stone shot out, and in a flash, the monster was flung backward, crashing into a classroom's blackboard. At this moment, 11 emerged from behind them, her nose bleeding again. She had used her powers to save them. Ignoring Mike's protests, 11 approached the monster. Before making her final move, she turned to look at Mike and said goodbye. Then, straining her body to channel the last of her energy, she unleashed her powers. Accompanied by the monster's agonizing howls and flickering lights, the monster finally turned to ashes. However, when everything calmed down, 11 was nowhere to be found, leaving Mike and the others to cry out in despair. Soon after, they were rescued by local police, and their mothers rushed to embrace them. Perhaps all Mike could do was bury his face in his mother's shoulder and cry. Meanwhile, Will was taken to the hospital for treatment, and his friends couldn't wait to visit him. They excitedly told him about their incredible adventure, as if they had just experienced a grand escapade. Nancy watched them but couldn't find happiness in their reunion. Although the monster had been defeated, her friend would never return. With a heavy heart, she walked away. Late at night, Hopper wandered the streets, smoking a cigarette. Suddenly, a government vehicle approached from behind. He tossed away his cigarette and got in the car, volunteering to cooperate with the ongoing investigation. A month later, Mike and his friends reunited in the basement. This time, they played games to their heart's content without any interruptions from their parents, spending the entire day together. They faced numerous challenges and ultimately defeated the final boss. However, the game couldn't heal Mike's heartache. He looked over at Eleven's hideout, realizing the kind and innocent girl was no longer there. Just then, Jonathan called his brother Will to come home as Christmas was drawing near. Every household had put up colorful lights, and Nancy had prepared a gift for Jonathan. When he unwrapped it, he found a camera inside. However, Nancy didn't choose him, but went back into Steve's arms instead. On Christmas Day, Hopper made a special trip to the woods and placed a box of candy and waffles into a wooden box, seemingly as a gift for someone. At the same time, Joyce prepared a lavish dinner intending to celebrate the holiday with her two sons. Before they sat down to eat, Will felt unwell and went to the bathroom, only to vomit up a strange creature. The surroundings instantly transformed into the cold and dark upside-down world, but then quickly returned to normal. It seemed like a hallucination experienced by Will. As the camera slowly pans out, snowflakes fall outside while the inside of the house is bathed in warm yellow light. The family reunion seems cozy and harmonious, and here ends Season 1 of this drama. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.